I haven't told anyone this before, not even my closest friends, but I can't keep it in any longer. When I was 14, I discovered something about my family that still haunts me to this day. It was the middle of summer, and I was bored out of my mind. I remember the heat pressing in through the windows, the air heavy and sticky, making every movement feel sluggish. My mom was out running errands, and I had the house to myself. I wandered from room to room looking for something, anything, to distract me from the oppressive heat and boredom. That's when I decided to explore the attic. Our attic was a place of mystery to me. It was one of those spaces you see in old movies, with creaky floorboards, cobwebs in every corner, and boxes piled high with forgotten belongings. I had been up there a few times before, usually with my parents when they were looking for old holiday decorations or childhood toys, but I had never really explored it on my own. That day, I climbed the narrow, rickety ladder and pushed open the heavy wooden door. The attic was dark and cool, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. As I stepped inside, the musty smell of old books and dust filled my nose. I flicked on the light, a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and began to look around. I wasn't sure what I was searching for. Maybe some old photos or letters, something to give me a glimpse into my parents' lives before I was born. I wandered from box to box, opening lids and peeking inside. Most of them were filled with the usual stuff: old clothes, baby toys, Christmas decorations. But then I found a box shoved into the far corner of the attic, half covered by a faded quilt. It was smaller than the others and much older, the cardboard worn and soft to the touch. My curiosity piqued. I carefully lifted the box and carried it to the center of the attic, where the light was brightest. I opened the box and was immediately hit with a wave of nostalgia. Inside were stacks of old letters, black and white photos, and a few pieces of jewelry. But what caught my eye was a small leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and faded with age. It was buried at the bottom of the box, as if someone had tried to hide it away. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up, the leather cool against my fingers. The journal had no title, no indication of who it belonged to, but I could tell it was old, decades old at least. I sat down on the dusty floor, cross-legged, and slowly opened the journal, the pages yellowed and fragile beneath my touch. The handwriting inside was neat, almost delicate, written in blue ink that had faded over time. I recognized it immediately. It was my mother's. But this wasn't the handwriting I was used to seeing in birthday cards or grocery lists. This was from a younger version of her, someone I had never known. The first few entries were what you'd expect from a teenager's diary. Thoughts about school, friends, crushes, and dreams for the future. She wrote about the boy she liked, her best friend, and how she couldn't wait to leave her small town and see the world. I found myself smiling at some of her entries, picturing my mom as a young girl, full of hope and excitement for what life had in store. But as I continued reading, the tone of the entries began to change. The writing became more erratic, the thoughts more scattered. It was clear that something had happened, something that had shaken her to the core. Then I came across an entry that made my heart stop. "I'm pregnant," she had written, the words scrawled across the page. "I don't know what to do. I'm so scared." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My mother had never mentioned anything about being pregnant before she had me. I turned the page, my hands trembling slightly. The next entry was written weeks later, and it was clear that she had been struggling with the news. "I haven't told anyone yet," the entry continued. "Not even my parents. I'm terrified of what they'll say. I'm terrified of what this means for my future. How can I take care of a baby? I'm just a kid myself." As I kept reading, I learned that she had decided to keep the pregnancy a secret. She wrote about the shame she felt, the fear of being judged, and the overwhelming sense of isolation. The entries became more and more sporadic, as if she couldn't bring herself to write about what was happening. Then came the entry that would change everything. "The baby is gone," she wrote, the words shaky and blurred as if they had been written through tears. "It was a boy. He was perfect. So small, so fragile. But he didn't make it. I don't know how I'm going to live with this. It's my fault. I should have told someone. I should have done something differently. Maybe then he would still be here." I remember feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My mother had a baby before me, a brother I never knew existed, and she believed that she was responsible for his death. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. The mother I knew was always so strong, so put together. But here in this journal was a side of her I had never seen. Vulnerable, heartbroken, consumed by guilt. I kept reading, desperate to understand more. But after that entry, the journal entries became scarce. When she did write, the tone was different, colder, almost detached. It was as if the grief had numbed her, leaving her unable to feel anything else. She wrote about going through the motions of life, pretending everything was normal, all while carrying this immense weight on her shoulders. The last entry in the journal was dated a few months before I was born. It was brief, just a few lines, but it said everything. "I'm pregnant again," she wrote, "but this time I'm going to do everything right. I have to. I can't lose another baby." I closed the journal and sat there in the attic, staring at the worn leather cover, my mind racing. All these years I had lived with the image of my mother as this strong, unwavering figure in my life, but now I knew the truth. She had been through something unimaginable, something that had shaped her in ways I couldn't even begin to comprehend. And she had kept it all hidden, buried away in an old attic box, like a dark secret she hoped to forget. As the days went by, I couldn't get the journal out of my mind. Every time I looked at my mom, I saw her differently. I saw the pain she had been hiding behind her smile, the grief she had buried deep within herself. I wanted to talk to her about it, to let her know that I understood, that I didn't blame her for anything, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. How could I? How could I tell her that I had uncovered this painful chapter of her life that she had tried so hard to keep hidden? Instead, I began to notice things I had never paid attention to before. The way her smile didn't always reach her eyes, the moments when she would stare off into the distance, lost in thought, the way she would hold me a little tighter on some days, as if afraid to let go. I wondered how much of her love for me was wrapped in the guilt of losing my brother. Did she see him when she looked at me? Did she wonder if I would have turned out like him if he had lived? I tried to push these thoughts away, but they kept coming back, gnawing at me. I felt like I was carrying a secret too heavy for my young shoulders. I couldn't talk to my mom about it, and I didn't know how to bring it up with anyone else, so I kept it inside just like she had. As I got older, the weight of the secret grew heavier. I became obsessed with the idea of my lost brother, wondering what he would have been like. Would we have been close? Would he have been my protector, my confidant? Or would we have fought like typical siblings, arguing over toys and teasing each other? I would lie awake at night, imagining what our family would have been like if he had lived. The thought of it consumed me. When I was around 16, I started acting out. I got into fights at school, skipped classes, and hung out with the wrong crowd. I think deep down I was trying to escape the burden of the secret. I didn't want to be the perfect child that my mother had desperately wanted to protect. I wanted to be anything but that. One day, after yet another call from the school about my behavior, my mom sat me down. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. I expected her to yell at me, to tell me how disappointed she was, but instead, she took my hands in hers and looked me straight in the eyes. "What's going on with you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "This isn't you. Talk to me, please." I stared at her, feeling the words rise up in my throat, but I couldn't bring myself to say them. How could I tell her that I knew about the baby, about the guilt she carried, about the pain she had been hiding for all these years? Instead, I shook my head and pulled my hands away from hers. I'm fine, I muttered, looking away. But I wasn't fine. Far from it. The tension between us grew as the years went by. My mom didn't know what was causing my anger, my distance, but I could see it was tearing her apart. I could see the fear in her eyes every time she looked at me, as if she was terrified that she was losing me too. And in a way, she was. I had built up this wall between us, a wall made of guilt and secrets, and neither of us knew how to break it down. When I left for college, I hoped that putting distance between us would help me sort out my feelings. But instead, it only made things worse. I found myself drowning in the memories of what I had read, unable to move on. I would call my mom, but our conversations were always strained, filled with awkward silences and forced small talk. I could tell she was hurt, that she didn't understand why I was pulling away from her, but I didn't know how to explain it. The guilt I felt over my distance from her was overwhelming. I wanted to be close to her, to let her in, but every time I thought about the journal, the words she had written, I felt like there was this insurmountable barrier between us. I didn't know how to bridge the gap. A few years passed and I graduated college, found a job, and moved into my own apartment. On the outside, everything seemed fine. I had a good job, a nice place to live, and a group of friends I could rely on. But inside, I was still that 14-year-old kid sitting in the attic with my mother's journal, feeling the weight of a secret too heavy to bear. One night, after a particularly rough day at work, I found myself sitting alone in my apartment, a glass of wine in my hand. I was feeling overwhelmed, frustrated, and lonely. I hadn't spoken to my mom in weeks, and the silence between us was eating away at me. I picked up my phone and stared at her number, my finger hovering over the call button. I don't know what came over me, but before I could stop myself, I pressed the button and held the phone to my ear. It rang once, twice, 3 times before she answered. Hello? Her voice was soft, hesitant, as if she wasn't sure who would be on the other end. Mom, I said, my voice cracking. It's me? There was a pause, and then she sighed, a sound filled with relief and sadness all at once. I've missed you, she said softly. I've missed you so much. I felt a lump form in my throat, and for a moment, I was at a loss for words. I wanted to tell her everything, to confess the burden I had been carrying for so long, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, I've missed you too, Mom. I'm sorry I've been so distant. There was a long silence. On the other end, I could almost feel the weight of unspoken words and emotions pressing down on us. I don't understand what's been going on with you, she finally said. But I want to. I want to be here for you. Her words made me ache. I knew she was trying her best to reach out, but I felt trapped in my own fears and guilt. It's not your fault, I said quietly. I've been dealing with things that I can't really explain. I'm sorry. Is there something you need to tell me? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Something you've been keeping from me? I hesitated, my heart pounding. I thought about the journal, about the pain and guilt it contained. I wanted to tell her how much I understood her suffering, how I wished I could take away the burden she carried, but the fear of hurting her or causing more pain held me back. I found something, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. Something I didn't expect to find, and it made me realize how much pain you've been carrying. What did you find? She asked, her tone now full of curiosity and concern. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I found an old journal of yours. When I was 14, it had entries about a baby you lost. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. Oh, God, she said. I was hoping I was hoping you would never find that. I didn't want you to know. I'm sorry, I said quickly. I didn't mean to invade your privacy. I didn't know how to handle what I read. No, it's not your fault, she said, her voice breaking out. It's just that I've been carrying that pain for so long. It's been a part of me and I thought I could protect you from it. But I guess I didn't do a very good job. It's okay, I said softly. I understand now. I understand why you've been the way you are. And I want you to know that I don't blame you for anything. I just wish you had told me. I wish we could have talked about it. I didn't want to burden you, she said. I thought if I kept it hidden, I could protect you from the pain, but I see now that I was wrong. I'm so sorry. I could hear the tears in her voice, and it made me want to reach through the phone and hold her. It's not just your fault, I said. I've been struggling too. I've been angry and distant, and I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away, but it didn't. It just made things worse. We talked for hours that night, sharing our fears, our regrets, and our hopes. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the conversation felt raw and painful, but it was also healing. We both admitted to each other the ways we had been struggling and the ways we had been trying to cope. I told her how I had found solace in my anger and how I had been pushing her away, not because I didn't love her, but because I didn't know how to handle my own emotions. We spoke about the journal and the baby she had lost, about the guilt she carried and the fear that had overshadowed so much of her life. She told me how she had tried to move on, how she had been so focused on making sure I was safe and loved that she had neglected her own grief. It was a conversation that brought us closer together, but it also left us both feeling exhausted. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions as we both tried to process everything we had shared. There were moments of tears and hugs and moments of silence as we both tried to come to terms with our new understanding of each other. In the weeks that followed, things began to change between us. We started to communicate more openly, sharing our thoughts and feelings in ways we hadn't before. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments of tension and misunderstanding, but we both made an effort to be more honest and supportive. I also began to see my mom in a new light. I saw the depth of her pain and the strength she had shown in moving forward, despite the grief she carried. I realized that the love she had for me was intertwined with her own struggles, and that her efforts to protect me from pain had come from a place of deep love and fear. Our relationship grew stronger as we faced our past and our present together. We found ways to support each other, to talk about the things that mattered, and to cherish the time we had together. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. The journal remained in the attic, still hidden away in that old box. I visited it occasionally, not to read it again, but to remind myself of the journey I had been on. It was a reminder of the pain and the healing, of the secrets and the understanding that had come from confronting them. In the end, I realized that the journey to understanding and forgiveness was ongoing. It was a process that involved not only uncovering hidden truths, but also learning to live with them and to support each other through the struggles and triumphs. And while the memory of that lost sibling would always be a part of me, it was no longer a burden I carried alone. It had become a part of our family's story, one that we faced together with love and understanding. As the months went by, life began to regain a sense of normalcy. The conversations with my mom had opened a new chapter in our relationship, and we were both learning to navigate this new dynamic. We found comfort in our newfound honesty, and it became a cornerstone of our interactions. However, the shadow of the past lingered, affecting how I approached my own life and relationships. I found myself constantly evaluating my own actions and reactions, trying to understand how my experiences had shaped me. I also began to appreciate the complexity of my mother's emotions and how they had influenced her decisions and behavior. In my personal life, I started to notice changes as well. The anger and frustration I had previously directed at myself and others began to dissipate. I was more focused on understanding my own feelings and communicating them effectively. It was as though the burden of the secret had lifted and I was able to approach life with a renewed sense of clarity and purpose. College was a time of significant growth for me. I became more involved in various activities and formed deeper connections with friends who offered support and understanding. My interactions with others were more authentic as I learned the importance of vulnerability and trust. The walls I had built around myself began to come down, and I allowed myself to form more genuine relationships. Despite these positive changes, there were moments when the past would resurface. Occasionally, I would catch myself reminiscing about the old journal entries and the emotional journey I had been on. During these times, I would call my mom and we would talk about the impact of those revelations on our lives. We found solace in sharing our struggles and celebrating our progress together. One significant conversation we had was about how to honor the memory of the sibling I had never met. My mom and I decided to create a small memorial in our backyard, a simple garden with a bench and a plaque dedicated to the baby she had lost. It was a way for us to acknowledge his existence and the impact he had on our lives, even if we had never known him. The act of creating the memorial was both cathartic and healing, offering us a tangible way to remember and honor him. As I continued to navigate adulthood, the lessons I had learned from that summer in the attic shaped my approach to relationships and personal growth. I became more attuned to the importance of addressing emotional baggage and confronting painful truths. My experiences taught me that understanding and forgiveness are ongoing processes, requiring patience and empathy. The journey wasn't always smooth. There were still moments of doubt and conflict, and at times I would struggle with the weight of the past. But with each challenge, I found strength in the lessons learned and the support I had from my mom and my friends. Our relationship continued to evolve, and we both worked hard to maintain the open communication we had established. In time, I also came to understand the importance of sharing our stories with others. I began to open up more about my experiences, both to friends and in various forums where I could offer support to those going through similar struggles. It became clear that the act of sharing wasn't just about relieving my own burden, it was about connecting with others and offering hope and understanding. Looking back, I realized that the discovery of my mother's journal was a turning point in my life. It was a moment that exposed deep-seated pain and vulnerability, but also offered a path to healing and growth. The journey through the attic and the secrets it revealed reshaped my understanding of my family and myself. It taught me that even in the face of profound loss and guilt, there is room for forgiveness, understanding, and love. The experience also highlighted the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the challenges and emotional turmoil, both my mom and I found ways to move forward, to heal, and to build a stronger bond. Our story became a testament to the power of facing the past and working together to create a future filled with hope and understanding. As I move forward in my life, I carry with me the lessons learned from that summer and the journey that followed. The story of my family's hidden pain and the process of uncovering and addressing it remains a significant part of who I am. It has shaped my approach to relationships, my understanding of grief and guilt, and my commitment to living authentically and compassionately. In the end, I've learned that secrets have a way of surfacing, and while they can be painful, they also offer opportunities for growth and healing. The act of confronting and sharing our truths, no matter how difficult, is a powerful step toward understanding ourselves and those we love. And through that process, we find the strength to move forward, to honor the past, and to embrace the future with a renewed sense of purpose and connection.